Let me just show you a couple of ideas on the Oracle as to what happened. So I'm gonna go on an old branch. So let me know when you see it. So let's see, let's go on release 0.6. Release 0.6 was the Code Arena one. So let's go on Echidna tester. So the Echidna tester was the base setup for that. And then we had the Echidna eBTC tester. And so there are a lot of, well, I think this is already fixed though. Actually, yeah, this is probably already fixed, but so let's, this will be the fixed version. Let's go and release 0.4 perhaps. Price feed tester, okay. So let's really just do a diff checker on this. And I would highly recommend that you go and release 0.4 price feed tester and 0.6 eBTC feed tester and do your own due diligence on what happened. But I'm gonna show you very briefly what happened. And the answer is we didn't check the coverage. That's the reality. So let's just quickly do a diff. And you shouldn't see a lot of differences, but you should see some differences that are fairly relevant. So let's go to the biggest difference here. You see that we have max price change set to 1.2E18. This means that we were changing at most the price by 20%. The bug that was missed was saying that the price of the feed had to change by more than 50% in one block. And so this is an example of how changing one line prevents you from finding a bug, because this is completely normal when you're setting up your price feed. It's like, let's just, you know, cap the change. Why would I let it change to a random number? Because the problem is if you let it change to a random number all of the time, you're gonna basically break a lot of math. Like people get liquidated instantly, a lot of shit happens. But that's also why you sometimes want to test stuff separately. So this is the first consideration. The second consideration was that, and it's very difficult to prove, but this off authority thingy, which is basically governance, was always reverting. And so there was like a check on authority that would have to change the feed. And the way the feed was set was that we would basically set it up here. And so the fallback feed was set here, and then once it will be removed, because we had like set fallback caller that will remove it, it will never be brought again, because the authority will always return false on your authorization to change the fallback, and so it wouldn't allow that. And so the only way, it's very, like, I'm gonna do a talk next time on this more specifically, which is gonna be next Thursday, but the only way for you to figure that out is to run Medusa for 20 minutes and check the coverage. And what you'll find on 0.4 is that this will always return false. The change of the Oracle always returns false. And so the number of values that are actually being tried by the feed on the left are very small, whereas the ones on the right are a lot more. And so the first thing I fixed was the authority so that we could have those toggle. The second things I changed, and you can see that I left this variable max price change, but it's actually never used because I realized very quickly that the idea of creating this realistic stepwise function where you change the price is dumb when you're fuzzing. When you're fuzzing, you should just let the fuzzer do the work. You don't want to do more work than you need to. And so what I did is I actually went on chain. You can see the addresses here. And I just got the maximum value for the ETH feed and the minimum value, as well as the maximum and the minimum value for the BTC feed. And I just set those to those defaults. So that way, it was impossible to have any opinion. Like we went from changing the price by 20% each time, at most, basically destroying the possibility of exploring prices because we are using this clamp variable, to whatever is theoretically possible, let the fuzzer try all of them. And by doing that, we were able to reproduce the bug. The way we found the bug, by the way, was this dorky fetch, what is it, fetch bulk batch, maybe? Maybe it's not here, actually. It's probably on 0.7. So let's go on 0.7. Maybe the contract changed its name here. So it's gonna take a moment to find it, but that's really all we did to find the bug, was remove, allow the chances of adding or removing the fallback, and then changing it so that it could change to a higher amount of values, and lastly calling the same function multiple times in a row and asserting that the value should never be different. Those are the three things we did. And once we did those three, we were able to fix it. And funnily enough, the price feed was not, I guess we weren't happy with it. And so we ended up using a different price feed. Okay, I don't like seeing this. So if this is what this is not what we're using, because there's this base, price feed tester base. But that 1.2 was basically the reason why this happened. But the reality as to why we had that value was that we didn't spend enough time running the fuzzer and checking the coverage. It's very different. This is something that you should always do. Even the Kyber repo is a great example. You have to not only check that the tester exists, but you should just run it and check the coverage, because the coverage can tell you a lot. And in the case of the price feed, the coverage was shit. And so that's the result you get. Let's see if we still have these. Fetch eBTC price feed. Okay, so maybe we're wrong. I would suggest you fork the code and run it again. But something that you also want to keep in mind, and it was something that was happening on this 0.4 version as well, was that the fetch price test, so fetch price, which was happening here in this thingy that was testing, get fallback response will revert if there's no fallback. And so, as I told you before, the authority will remove the fallback, and now the fallback no longer works. And so what was happening here is that this test was actually being skipped the majority of times because it was reverting. And a function that reverts in an invariant testing suite is skipped. It doesn't cause an assertion to fail. And so that's another example of basically not thinking about the consequences enough. Because again, you really want to check where the coverage stops, how the calls are doing. And so it just takes a lot of time to get the things right, but it also requires less control, like less checks, less blockers. And so another way to deal with this was to effectively add more try catches everywhere. I think I added at least one more because ultimately even this secondary price feed, if we have price feeds that can self-destruct, for example, and so if you call this and it's self-destructed, this should fail. If the eBTC feed is self-destructed, this should also fail. And so this is another example, and maybe there's more stuff here that I'm missing, but it's an example of potentially missing on coverage or missing on interesting states because you assume that everything will be automatically tested, when in reality, if this try catch reverts because the eBTC feed is self-destructed, this entire thing never gets executed. And so having the catch here that causes this to fail could actually end up not working. And so, but that's also why we ended up introducing the eBTC feed. This was basically I wouldn't call it my baby because, but a part of the work was done by me, and it was the tinfoil call. And so let me see if we have this tinfoil call. Yeah, the tinfoil call is basically my work, and it's basically the idea that if you want to never revert, this is the only way in which you can perform a call. You have to cap the gas, you have to use excessively safe call. In our case, I changed excessively safe call to check exactly to have a length of 32, and then you basically, that's the only way in which you will never revert. And so if your tester on Echidna doesn't look like that, then every time it reverts, it's not gonna cause a test to fail. And so you may actually be losing on possible bugs because the Echidna is literally skipping them. And so that's where you really want to be mindful of like having an assert on revert instead of a require on revert, because a require will skip it, whereas an assert will always flag it. And so it gets really nuanced really fast. But the long story short was the 20%, the lack of checks, not checking the coverage, and lastly having all of these skips on reverts, because reverts actually don't tell you anything. They don't cause the test to fail. And so my biggest advice going forward is for you to check the coverage of the actual coverage. I'm not sure if you're familiar with. Just back. Okay, that sucks. So basically you lost the most important aspect. But the long story short is 20% change equals bad. Revert is skipped. So by skipping them, you never find bugs. And the last thing was not checking coverage equals dumb. Like you have to check the coverage. Like the idea that the fuzzer or the tests have a lot of logic doesn't mean shit, because maybe they're always reverting, and if they're always reverting, you're not going to find anything. So it's really important that you actually check the coverage report, and from the coverage report you make your determination about the tests that are being found, because otherwise you're not going to you're basically going to skip on stuff that is actually vulnerable. And in our case, it was really about spending more time checking the coverage report, adding more try catches, making sure that those try catches weren't causing skips, and lastly, making sure that the bias on the change of the price was removed by allowing it to change to any price. So next week we'll do an even deeper dive. We'll do an actual like full call only on that. But I think we'll call it for this week. We appreciate your viewership. Best of luck on the bug bounty. And if you end up using the tool, let us know. And feel free to share your repos. We'll share them with the community. And we do this every Thursday. Expect a lot of interesting stuff from us as we start fuzzing the chain and sharing some of those lessons with you all. You have an amazing weekend, and talk to you next week.